Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our regular Sunday afternoon Meet the Atheist segment. Gives me great pleasure to welcome and introduce to our channel. Everybody knows you as Aunt Kathy. Welcome. You are very welcome here. So today we're going to talk all about religion, leaving it behind, and we are going to and Kathy is going to share her journey with us. So I guess let's start at the beginning. Would you mind telling us about your religious background and what it was like?
Sure. Very early, I attended a Lutheran school from kindergarten, first and second grade. My family was not real religious, but they wanted me in the school. I was the oldest of four children. When the second grade came around, towards the end of it, our family relocated, and I was not able to continue in the school. And so that was the end of formal teaching of any kind. We didn't go to church anymore after that. Everything changed drastically in my life from that point on. By that, I mean that my father became a raging, abusive, neglectful alcoholic. And the many years that followed were quite traumatic. We moved every year, mostly within the same city. I was in a different school every year, except for 2 years at the same one school. The abuse was beatings. His favorite was a belt with her. I mean, the buckle didn't matter if it hit you. Mama was abused. My brother and I were abused. We often had no electricity, no food in the cupboards. I mean, it was quite harsh. By the time I was 16, I was 14. The abuse started progressing into ways that I was very uncomfortable with. He did not rape me, but he did molest me. And I finally went to, I took a bottle of aspirin. I just couldn't live that way anymore. I took a bottle of aspirin and I went to, I wrote a note to my mom. She found it, woke me up, pumped me full of coffee, and we finally talked. And then that was a weekend. On Monday, I went into school and talked to the guidance counselor. And that was the first time I had ever told anyone what was going on in my home. Within 2 weeks or less, I was placed into foster care for my protection. I lived in 3 or 4 different foster care homes. And then when I was 16, I was placed in a home that was owned and managed by a church. And it was a girls' group home. I felt very peaceful there. The whole place was so calm, so peaceful. It was just very, very different for me. One of the rules of the home was that we had to be at the church every time the doors were open, of course. The church was a non-denominational. The pastor had originally been trained under the Assemblies of God and then went out on his own. For reasons I was shocked after I learned much, much later what happened. But anyway, so it was a charismatic, church. It was the It was, well, I lived in a pretty good sized city. It's considered the second largest in our state.
Right.
And I was surprised to learn that it was the only church in the community that was accepting the hippies. Now, I don't know if you had hippies in South Africa back in the late 60s and early 70s. Those were the days, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
I think sex, drugs, and rock and roll was part of the day back then. And when I went to church, there were 2 or 3 that were from that community who had gotten saved. I didn't know even the terminology of being saved. I mean, we didn't do that in the Lutheran Church. So anyway, at one of the Sunday evening services, I was sitting up in the balcony, and it was a baptismal night. One of the men was, he was in his late 20s. He was being baptized, and he shared his testimony of how he tried to commit suicide by running his car off the bridge. And he was high, and it did not happen the way he had planned it. He spent time in the hospital, and during that time in the hospital, he had a vision of God, and then became saved, wound up linking up with the church I was at, and he was just sharing about the peace he had, and the love of God and all that. And I just started crying. I couldn't stop crying. And so I left the balcony and I went downstairs. I mean, I was sobbing, crying. And my foster father was there at the bottom of the stairway, and he said, "Kathy, are you okay?" And I said, "Whatever he has, I want." So we went into the prayer room, and on November 16th, 1969, at the age of 16, I gave my heart to Jesus.
Right.
So that was a few years ago.
Yeah, it's a long journey, but it's funny that you mention it. It's weird how we as humans we gravitate towards these narratives of transformation, because we realize that there's something special in that whole transformation, and we realize that we're not perfect, so we yearn for that transformation to perfection. Right. It's funny how and religion loves to sell that.
Yes. And as coming out of the background that I did, and having very low self-esteem, not feeling loved, having all the traumas, that I experienced through my early life, I felt like I was coming into a place of peace. I was basically love bombed. I felt safe. And they were providing everything I could ever hope or dream for. Was being offered to me. And of course I'd take it, And everybody was so kind and nice. And, I mean, how those early days are of something new, and you're,
it's like a honeymoon.
I was just going to say that, in the honeymoon period. And I quickly got very involved with everything, with Bible studies, prayer meetings. That's where I learned to pray. And you pray out loud. You don't pray silently. So our Saturday night prayer meetings were something else. And then I got into classes they had, and the teaching, now that I look back on it, was very different and interesting. I don't know if you've ever heard of the biblical scholar whose name is Finis J. Dake. He had a Dake's Bible that he printed out. Okay. If I take a minute and tell you of the foundation of my faith. It may help explain why I stayed in it for so long. Would that be good to do?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
Okay. Finis Dake, I call him Finis, it's actually Finus, taught that there was a world that existed before Adam, that world was actually a testing ground for angels, that God was trying to prove things or have angels prove themselves, and that during that time is when the dinosaurs and all those animals that we wonder why they weren't on the ark. Well, they were on the first earth. He taught that in Genesis, the difference between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2 was the creation of the first world that was the pre-Adamic world. And
right, because there's two stories. There's two Genesis stories, right? I get it now. Yeah.
He taught that during that time of the angelic reign and testing was when Satan fell from grace. I have seen you fall, O Lucifer, son of the morning. You've heard that scripture.
Yeah.
And then, let's see, what else? Oh, he also taught that during a Christian's time on earth, we were in training for the responsibilities that we would have in heaven.
Right.
And he used the scripture from Revelation 21 of the new heaven and the new earth. And so the new heaven was not where we would just be floating around, playing the harp and talking praises to God, but that we would have responsibilities. And that on earth, we were being trained for those.
Right.
So that when it was time to be in the new heaven and the new earth, that we would be able to use the skills that we had, and God would employ us in such a way as we had been trained for. So Earth
is just what we are experiencing now is just boot camp. It's boot camp for heaven.
Yeah. So we didn't. It didn't make heaven seem like it would be a boring place.
Yeah.
It made it feel like, well, we have things to do, and so part of the purpose of our training was to find what we were really good at, knowing that God would employ that when we were in heaven. The other thing, he was very dispensational, and we were in the dispensation of grace. And so everything was about God's grace and about God's love. So we didn't really hear a lot of teaching about hell. I mean, even throughout my 52 years of Christianity, I don't remember very many sermons on hell, honestly, because it was always the grace of God, the love of God, and if you were saved, you were in. And if you backslid, he would work in your life to bring you back to him. Like the prodigal son story. So that was sort of what my foundation was.
Right.
The first 3 years of my Christian walk that's what I was taught, and that's what became a part of my belief system.
Yeah. And it's amazing how religion becomes part of your identity.
Absolutely.
It's strange. Like when I look back on my life, I didn't think of myself as, okay, I'm Dean, I'm a human being. I thought of myself as, I'm Dean, I'm a Christian, so it becomes part of your identity, and it becomes a filter through which you approach the world. There's almost like there's another layer of behavior that's wrapped around you, and you don't
Right.
react and respond to things because of this layer of wrap that's around you. It's crazy.
Yes, absolutely. And
And
again, the fact that love was always the foundation of most teaching,
yeah,
um, was something that just stuck with me because I needed that so badly
yeah,
in my
yeah,
life.
yeah,
And I found that I had comfort,
yeah, yeah,
and those things just I held on to that,
yeah, yeah. But
Um,
this is one thing that Christianity does very, very well is it identifies people who are in need, people who are struggling with life,
exactly.
people who are struggling with relationships, with any issue in your life. No matter what flavor of struggle you have, that Christianity has got a solution in there for you. So
Hmm.
it's only to be expected that people who find themselves in times of distress or times of need or times of struggle will turn to something that claims to have the solution, and
Hmm.
it's empty. It's an empty solution because it's far be it for the church to roll up their sleeves and get their hands dirty. They're only
Hmm.
selling you an idea. It's very
Hmm.
strange how that works. so,
I
so
Go ahead.
I was sorry. I was going to ask you, what was the straw that broke the camel's back for you?
Oh gosh.
What was? Tell us a little bit about your journey of doubt, or how can we say the road to thinking that there's something wrong here, and you know,
I I think along the journey, um, I had different questions and things would pop up that I kind of filed away. This and in my life, I've moved quite a bit into adult life in 6 different states. So I was involved with different churches, different ministries. I worked for CBN, which was the Pat Robertson's ministry in Virginia Beach. Are you familiar with that one?
he's the old guy, right? Yeah.
He
He
just
looks
passed
like a
away recently.
he looks like a wax doll from Madame Tussauds museum. I mean,
Oh, you think? Well, yes, I worked there for 3 years.
isn't he the
And
guy that sells the doomsday buckets and stuff
no,
online?
that's Jim Baker. That's
Sorry,
that's
I'm
Jim
confusing
Baker.
them.
Yeah. No, actually, Jim Baker got his start from being with Pat Robertson. So Pat Pat was something else. Um, that was quite a journey. I don't know how many years. I've been a Christian at least 20 years when I went to work there.
Right,
And
right.
I thought my first day I was going to be in a little corner of heaven, that it was just going to be so wonderful. And my bubble got burst very quickly. I was so disappointed because people are people. I mean,
Yeah,
there's going to be people who say one thing and do another,
yeah,
and there were not. I would say not everybody there agreed with Pat's theology. He didn't check and verify your theology when you signed up to be employed there. You just wanted to make sure you were a Christian, but even that was towards the end. That was being considered. What's the word? I'm losing it today. Dis, Not disrespectful. Well, separating people, and you can't do that. You have to be employing everybody, offering the opportunity.
right.
So that did change, but for like the job I started out with. It was called teleministry. It was really telemarketing.
Cold calling.
Yes, cold calling. And some of the sweet little old ladies would think Pat had told us specifically to call her and pray with her. And of course, that always involved money. And when we first started, it was the old fashioned sitting at an old table, punching buttons to dial the phone. And then by the time I left, it was all computerized. It was just, we had a script. We were timed, you know, it was very much telemarketing. You didn't have real time for ministry with these people. But that was an interesting thing. But it was while I was there that I met a gentleman and became a pastor's wife. And was a pastor's wife for 30 years. And then it was 7 years ago that my deconstruction journey began. Only I didn't realize at the time that's what was going on. My birth father, who I had been estranged from for many years, had died. He lived in another state. And I was contacted to come settle his estate, his business, and everything, because I was the oldest in a, you know, living child. And so my brother and one of my sisters went with me. And we decided we were going on a mission for truth. Well, the truth then was about him and finding out about the truth about our father. And there had been many stories, and he was he had the grandiose thinking, and what we were told and what we found were quite different. But it led me to continue in seeking for truth in other areas. And I particularly, the first thing I can remember is that it started to really trouble me of people always ending their prayers in Jesus' name. You know, and it was like, it just sounded like, well, this is just the lucky charm to make sure that everything I pray is going to be answered because I prayed in Jesus' name. So I started studying a little deeper and got a little into the Greek of all that, and just found that the way we were using it was not the way it was intended. That's not what Jesus meant, that we tack it on at the end of every prayer. And so I quit praying that way. And I talked to my brother, who's a pastor, and we discussed it a little bit. And he kind of agreed with me to a certain extent, but then he said, but I'm still going to do it. And I thought, fine, you do whatever you want, but for me, it doesn't feel comfortable. And then I started listening to some different rabbis. Because if the Old Testament was the foundation of the New Testament, I needed to hear it from the guys who knew the Old Testament.
Right from the horse's mouth.
And I started hearing things that, wait a minute, that's not what I've been taught, you know. Perhaps you remember in Genesis where it says, let us make man in our image.
Who are we?
Yeah. Well, I was always taught that was the Trinity, you know, of course. And that is not what that is. Another scripture that really was open to me from the great rabbis I listened to was in Isaiah 53. where by his stripes we are healed. That whole, whole chapter that so many Christians quote and use for prayer, and to realize that that whole book of Isaiah is about Israel. It has nothing to do with Christians. That was
Yeah.
just, verses have been picked out of the Old Testament, and Christians use them as prophetic, but they're not. They really are not. So that was another thing to start questioning. Um, and then I had several loved ones who all died within 18 months. I lost 5 people. My
Wow.
best friends of 33 years, another friend who was 25 years, and family, and all were Christians, all had been prayed for in Jesus' name. It was
Right.
just, it was so traumatic that
Yeah.
some were because of illnesses, some were not, but it was like suddenly
Yeah.
they're all gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, I decided to get into studying what is this Bible that I've been reading for 52 years? What
Right.
how was it written? How was it really put together? What is the canonization process?
Right.
You mean to tell me that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John weren't written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John?
No.
Do you really mean to tell me that Paul influenced the church a whole lot more than Jesus?
Yep.
And I mean, all of that stuff. I started then listening to various shows on YouTube,
Yeah.
and my oldest nephew had a channel. He had just deconverted and had started a channel, and I listened to him, and he had various different people on. And one day I called him and said, "Why don't we meet for lunch?" So I drove up to where he lived, about an hour and a half away from me, and he he was thinking that Aunt Kathy was going to try and reconvert him,
Yeah. You're fixing to give him a grilling. But
Yeah, that's what he really thought. And by the way, I'm the one who brought Christianity into my whole family.
right.
After,
Right.
after I got saved, then a few years later, I went back to my home to visit, family. And my purpose was to get my dad saved. And of course, that didn't happen. But
Yeah.
I prayed with my mom and my 2 sisters, and my boyfriend prayed with my brother. So everybody was saved. And then when they got married, then their families got saved. And, so I was the one that started this mess. And so my oldest nephew and I meet together for lunch. He calls it, we met for Atheist Pizza. And he was really expecting something different. And
Right.
I wanted him to be reassured. I said, "Austin, I am not here to try to reconvert you. I
Yeah.
have questions." And
Mm.
I felt like he was the safe one to ask
Yeah.
questions
Yeah.
about what happened, why, what were you thinking, what was the processing. And I shared the different questions that I was having. And we had a good hour or more. And I just soaked it up. I just felt safe to ask these
Mm.
questions. And he gave me titles of different books to read and different podcasts to listen to and all. And so I started doing that more and listening more. And I really particularly would hone in on anything that Dr. Joshua Bowen was on. For some reason, the way he could share,
Mm.
and the fact that he had been a pastor at one time too, something about that connected with me.
Yeah.
And I heard him and probably two others kept referring to the Epic of Gilgamesh. And
Right.
I had never read it.
Right.
So I got online and I found it and I read it. This was in April of 2021. And
Right.
after I read it, I remember standing up, walking out of my bedroom door and saying, "That's it. I'm done." And I just felt such a release.
Yeah.
I thought the first thing, Dean, that I noticed was fear was
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah.
And this feeling of um, probably being under somebody's thumb, you
Yeah.
know.
Mm.
It took me a good while to get away from the God is watching you,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that paranoia thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it took a while for me to get over that. I mean, every once in a while, I'll still get that feeling, but no, that I can't remember the date. I just remember it was in April of 2021 that I
Yeah.
finally said, "No more. I no more."
Yeah.
And then from there on, I continued. I like to study. I like to
Yeah.
research stuff, and so
Mm.
I started digging in more and more to have a better understanding of what's the real foundation of this thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, so that in a nutshell is kind of what
Yeah. And
happened.
the funny thing is, you mentioned how when you recognized doubt, when you recognized doubt, you nurtured that doubt, and
Hmm.
you kept on investigating and looking for more information. And the church don't like that. They don't like that. They don't like people who think for themselves, who are curious, who invest. Because they like to have somebody who can lay down the line. Lay down the line, and everybody must just toe. So, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, it's going to be the end of religion, this information age that we live in now. Because, like you
Hmm.
said, you just had you could look up information online quickly and find
Oh
and
yeah.
find stuff. Whereas
Hmm.
20, 40, 50 years ago, it was people didn't have access to that kind of a
Hmm.
freedom from of information.
And
Um,
you believed everything that
yeah,
somebody,
yeah,
you believed everything that was taught to you. And I mean, I was quite gullible.
yeah,
And, from the time of my born again experience, I was quite gullible. And part
yeah,
of that gullibility, I think, again, was because of my traumatic background. I
yeah,
wanted, I, I wanted this thing to be true. I wanted there to be a God in heaven who would take care of me and, had all the answers and would make my life peaceful. I really, really wanted that to be true. And so
right,
it wasn't
right.
hard to walk into that and keep believing that.
But this is also the thing, because Christianity comes to you from a person that has a pseudo position of authority.
Yeah.
We put these preachers and these holy men and the men of God. We put them on these pedestals, and they assume an authority over us. So people are very reluctant to question or even give it two thoughts when it comes from this authority. And the sad thing is that they know that they are in a position of authority, and they abuse that authority
Hmm.
over people. And it's
Hmm.
you just Google crazy African pastor. That's all you need to Google, and you'll see how these men of God, so-called men of God, behave when they think that they are strong and that they have numbers.
I have
Um,
watched a few of those. I have, really.
You mentioned Digital Hammurabi, which is Dr. Joshua Bowen's channel. Were there any other organizations or people that you remember as having an influence in this journey for you?
I did watch a good bit of Myth Vision.
Yeah.
But at that time, I did not know about Recovering from Religion or the Freedom from Religion Foundation.
Right.
So a lot of it was between myself, my nephew. We talked a couple times a week at first,
Yeah.
and then just reading, lots of reading of, different things that were recommended on different programs. And then there were some TV shows that came on that were semi-informative,
Yeah.
and some historical shows that led me into researching a few things. So, and I continued to listen to the rabbis for a while too, just because I liked hearing what I thought was the truth of the Old Testament, and seeing the
Right.
difference in what I had been taught was the Old Testament versus the New, or I mean, our version versus their version. And then later on, I mean, what I'm into now more is really two things, actually. One is researching and reading and studying with how trauma affects those who go into religion, and then religious trauma. And a very high percentage of those who experience religious trauma had trauma in their life beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just a natural setup.
Yeah.
You were just so trained in your actions and reactions to the life of trauma to go into the narcissistic trauma from home, and then the narcissistic trauma from a headship, a leader, a pastor, whatever. There's so many similarities, and I'm really fascinated with Dr. Marlene Winnell. And yes, you familiar with her work? And
yes.
oh gosh, who else? I've had Janice Selby. I took a Recovering from Religion class with her. And so that I'm really interested in. And then also I've been studying more and learning more of the mythology.
Right.
That's really what most of this Bible is built upon.
Yeah. And it's strange. Have you ever heard the expression that religion is like sausages? When once you know how the sausages are made, you lose your taste for eating them. And this is basically what when you lift the hood and look what's under the hood of the car, you realize that you're traveling on a hope and a prayer. There's nothing really that keeps it going. It's very interesting. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about you mentioned some of the impact, and when we talk about the negative impact that religion has on people always say to yourself, like, did the priest touch you, or who abused you, or whatever? But nobody thinks of the psychological impact that that it strips away your agency, it strips away your authenticity, it strips away just your freedom from you. What are some of the the most prominent impacts that you recognize that religion had on you now that you reflect back on your life?
I would say the primary ones were, I have been married twice.
Right.
The first marriage, I was quite young. Um, he was supposed to be a Christian also, and it wasn't long until I realized I was actually living with a man who was much like my father. So the first time there was abuse, I went to my pastor for counsel, you know. And when I left there, I basically felt like it had been all my fault. And um, that role of being a submissive wife was what was promoted more than help for me as a person. My personhood was, you know, not valued. That divorce happened after 12 years. His job took him away from home a lot. So even though we were married 12 years, we were only together about 6 maybe. Out of that, I have 2 beautiful daughters. And they're my treasures. And then when I married my pastor husband, I was in that relationship for 30 years. And again, I knew early on it is my biggest mistake of my life. um, but here I was, a pastor's wife with a role to play, and I had to honor God. I had no other means of support at the time. Not only did I have my children, but then we wound up raising his children too. So we had a household of 5 children. And it was a very unfulfilling, like living with my brother kind of marriage. If
Right.
that crossed right. You know,
Yeah.
I don't like to say ugly things, but it was real ugly. And it was finally after 30 years, and I had started therapy because of an illness that had caused me to have to quit working. And on the counsel of one of my doctors, he said, Kathy, I think therapy would help you to make this transition. Well, this therapist was secular. I had never gone to a secular therapist before. And it took a long time for me to begin to be honest with her about things other than what was going on because of the illness I had.
Right.
But eventually, I came to see that I had value and worth, and that in the situation I was in, I just felt like I was emotionally dying. And it just was one day, he was gone, and I packed my bags and I went to stay with my mom and stepdad. They welcomed me home and said, as long as you need to be here to get things together, we're for you. Nice. What took you so long?
Good for you. Good for you.
So
you know, this is something that, you know, religion also teaches women, especially, that they are, you know, they're second-class citizens. Their needs of the needs of a woman is not important, you know, because she's there to serve her husband, basically to be a companion of her husband. So this also plays a part in the way that that women deal with relationships. You know, women are taught very often, like you said, you know, the religious people or the religious figures in our lives will brush off, you know, these concerns or issues that women raise. And then when men raise an issue, it's all of a sudden it's a big deal, you know. And I think that religion feeds into this patriarchal structure that's built into our society. And I mean, you can pull scriptures until the cows come home, where where religion is not a friend of woman. Let's just put it that way.
Hmm. Exactly. And being in the role of a pastor's wife, oh my goodness, the pressures and the expectations. And when I left him, I was ostracized from the other pastors' wives because a good Christian wife doesn't leave her husband.
Right, right.
And I thought, well, then consider me not a good Christian wife, because this was before my deconstruction. You
Right.
know, I mean, it was really, I think I was starting, but didn't realize it at the time. And
Right.
that was my first step into freedom. It was very hard because I left with nothing, a suitcase, and circumstances were, well, let's just say that what I got out of the divorce was $300 in debt, plus paying bills that I thought hadn't been paid. I had nothing,
Right.
zero. So in my early 60s, having to start from scratch to build my life, it was very, very hard.
Yeah. Sounds
And
challenging. Yeah. Yeah.
it was very challenging. And, I didn't have, I had some people who promised to do things, some good Christian friends who promised to do some things. And then when it came time for me to say, hey, you promised to do this, that, and the other, and they didn't come through, it was like, whoa, wait a minute. What is this? Who are you?
Yeah, but this is the thing that always got me about these Christian friends, these Christian relationships that you build up is that they are so extremely shallow and fake. People will smile to your face and promise you mountain and sea, but then like you say, where the rubber hits the road, that's where you really see that these people were not being authentic. It's all for show. It's all this image of what a good Christian should be like, and then when you need to push on somebody's button, it's not really there. Very, very strange how that works.
Yes, I will be your friend if you will believe like me and behave like
Exactly.
me.
It's
And
conditional.
very conditional. Hmm.
Mm.
Very conditional. So, I've learned my lessons.
Good for you. Good for you. So, they always say that hindsight is 2020. When we look back, we always see what we should have done differently. But when you look back, what would you say to a younger version of yourself? What kind of advice would you give to somebody who's in that position?
Well, if a person is coming, especially from a healthier background than I came from, is to really check things out more. I mean, today we can do the internet. Today we can really search things, realize that there are 42,000 different Christian denominations across the world, and they all believe they're right. And so if you're in a group that, says this way is the best and only way, run.
Right.
I mean,
that was actually the straw that broke the camel's back for me, is finding out that there are other religions.
mm-hmm.
I think to myself, okay, they cannot all be right at the same time, but they can all be wrong at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't believe that it took me years to figure this out. It's strange, but it was just like that. it's like something dropped and you and all of the shoe dropped and it just all of a sudden made sense. Yeah. So what was the fallout zone like? When you came out now and said, "Look, guys, I don't believe this anymore." What was the fallout zone in terms of relationships? Because something that I always like to point out to people who consider deconverting or leaving their religion is that there is a social cost. There's a social cost involved, first of all. There's an emotional cost, and then sometimes it goes even further, depending on how deeply religion is intertwined in your life. Sometimes it affects your employment. It affects the way that you conduct your life, when you discard it. What was it like for you in terms of the fallout?
It was very lonely.
Right.
When I first tried to discuss a little bit with my youngest sister, who has now since passed away, she was very defensive. And of course, her son is Austin, who helped me see the light, and walk out.
And you'll come to Jesus moment.
Yeah. And his personality is very different than mine. So he's very outspoken, and I'm not that way. I've always been kind of a quiet person.
Right.
And I challenged a few things with her. I think it scared her because I was the one that led her into the faith. And now here I am saying it's not true. And my two daughters had already deconstructed. And so it was a big relief to them. And it really has helped my relationships with them and my grandchildren. I mean, I have a 23-year-old, 16 and 13, all boys. And it's just really made a big difference there. But it was very lonely, very, very lonely. I have one remaining sibling who is my brother, who is a pastor. And I'm allowed to go into his home only when I go to get our mother and take her out. Once a week, we have a mother-daughter day. And but anytime other than that, I'm not allowed to be there because I'm an atheist. And, I'm going to bring demons and stuff with me. He and his wife are very adamant that because I'm now an atheist, they would prefer me not be in their home. So, but I'm just the same person. When I left the faith, there's nothing changed in me as far as who Kathy is. And some people like to experiment and do all the things that they couldn't do. They'll go out drinking and partying and all that kind of stuff, Maybe if I'd been younger, I might have tried that. But I'm just the same person. Nothing's different. I just made a decision that says, I know I do not believe there is a God, particularly the God of the Bible. Right. I lean agnostic because I don't think anybody can declare 100% there is or is not a God,
Exactly.
And if Christians would realize there's no way they can proclaim that with 100% accuracy. Do I think there's a God? No. But yeah. So the YouTube channels have helped me a lot. And then in recent days, it's been 2-3 months almost, I was a part of Life After Christianity community on Facebook. And they were trying to think of ways to grow the channel a little bit more. And I suggested small groups because I used to be a small group leader in the church,
Right.
My idea was building friendships, you
Yeah.
know. So I, they allowed me to use their platform to put out a little thing saying, you know, would you be interested in a small group? And here's when we're going to meet. So we've been doing a Zoom meeting every Wednesday, and we have been building friendships.
Right.
It's not a class.
Yeah.
It's not any structure. It's we've each shared our stories to a certain extent, but we just share life together. We cry
Yeah.
together. We laugh together. We have people from all across the United States, and I have someone from South Africa in the group. And so the seven of us, look forward to meeting every week, and we check on each other throughout the week, and it's just been wonderful. And
Yeah.
that is something I'd like to really promote is more
Yeah.
people. Let's do this.
Yeah.
In building community, it's building friendships, and I know some people do it through the chats on some of the different shows or the oh, what's the after the show thing that you can do? My brain, maybe I need my more coffee this morning.
Are you talking about TikTok or something?
No, it's through YouTube. Their discourse, yeah, yeah,
Oh,
discourse.
yes, yes, yes.
That some people, you know, meet in there and chit chat a little bit,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you know, we've just made this connection, and I mean, a goal is to someday meet in person,
Yeah.
and and one of
But
our long-term goals is to meet in South Africa, but that
nice.
will be a
You
very
must get,
long-term goal.
yeah, you are very welcome here. We are
Yeah.
very friendly people, and we're very welcoming people.
Uh-huh.
You must just let us know when you're coming.
Well, and one of my daughters told me last week, she said, "Oh, Mom, I've always wanted to go to South Africa." So who knows what our travel plans may be.
Yeah. What I wanted to ask you is just about. Sorry, I'm just trying to skim through because I trust me, I emailed you like a whole interrogation. I sent you a whole interrogation, and we'll never get to cover everything. So I just want to be selective and ask you a final question in closing, because I also want to be just mindful of the time. I don't want to keep you here forever. What I was going to ask you were, yes, this is the one. So, what aspects of growth, or because people always like to focus on the negative of religion. Oh, religion is so terrible and blah, and look at the pastors and look how they do this. But we fail to realize that when we leave religion behind, we change as people. And a lot of people in our community here report that they just completely new people. They're far more accepting. They're less judgmental, and so many aspects of the way that they interact with the world change. What are some of the positive aspects that you have seen in yourself since you've left religion?
Uh, one thing I feel is that I have more um, creativity
Right.
and allow myself to tap into that. I don't
Yeah.
look at that as a waste of time or I should be reading my Bible or, I should be praying. No, it's okay I like to write short stories, and I've never been published, but it's therapeutic for me. And my
Right.
imagination travels to places that you know, I have a story about a squirrel with a magical tail. Where did that come from? um, I,
Exactly.
I'm coming to the place of realizing the many things that I have learned through my life, um, are to be shared.
Yeah.
That at first I thought, what am I going to do now? Here I am. I'm 71 years old.
Right.
What in the world is there? I've got less years ahead of me than I've got behind me. What in the
Right.
world can I do? But
Yeah.
I'm finding that just doing this, just
Yeah.
allowing myself to be interviewed, just to be able to share the ins and outs of things that I saw,
Yeah.
and experienced. I mean, I got a lot of stories, I've learned a lot over the
Right.
years. And
Right.
that's not for me to just keep it inside of me, but to share. I feel like I have made huge advancements in my mental health. And my therapist even tells me that, I have, God bless her, God bless her, whoever, the universe bless her. I mean, she's been with me for over 10 years and has
Yeah.
walked through everything and just really has been behind me in this deconstruction process.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
We stand on the shoulders of giants as well, like
Mhm.
and the thing is, in sharing your experience with us and with the people around you, you are also you're adding to that momentum of just people waking up and seeing the world for what it is.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
um, it's really heartwarming speaking to you, because everything that you say resonates with me so deeply, and it's really been an absolute pleasure and an absolute joy speaking to you. In closing, if anybody wants to connect to you, don't give your personal social media links out now, but if anybody wants to connect with you, you can send me, just a link to some profile or some throwaway email address,
Okay.
and I will put that in the description of this YouTube video, so that if anybody wants to reach out, maybe they're interested in your Facebook group or something like that, maybe they're interested in joining that, we can connect those people to you.
Sure.
But yes, in closing, I just wanted to say thank you so much for spending your Sunday morning with us. It's really been an absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed speaking to you. Keep fighting the good fight.
Thank you,
And
Dean.
yeah, like I said, thank you so much again. Take care, and we will connect again soon.
Okay. Thank you. It's been an honor to be with you today. Bye bye.
Bye.